Petey. Hello, welcome to another STEM Stories. So today I'm speaking to Lee Booty, who I used to work with a few years ago now. So very exciting to hear an external description of your role.
Indeed,
um,
indeed.
Feeling very bad though, because Lee's in Australia on the other side of the world from me. So whilst I'm quite happy starting my work day, Lee's very much finished his. So thanks very much for coming and speaking with us.
No worries, all good.
We'll try not to go past sleep time. If I see you nod off, that'll be the end.
Indeed. Yeah, no worries at all.
So I appreciate that you have quite recently changed this, but could you tell us about your current job?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently a venture principal scientist, whatever that means on the streets, but
Oh, cool.
here in Melbourne, in Australia, working for an academic institute called the WEHI, or the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, as it used to be known. And the role really is around connecting academia to translational and therefore commercial outputs. And so, what that really means is kind of taking really basic science from our kind of traditional academic labs, university labs, recognizing where there's potential for a potential drug or a technology that could impact patients or humans in any way, really. And even actually, in some cases, animals. We've also done a little bit in animal work, and trying to turn that research away, not away from, but in parallel to the traditional academic output of publications, but also then trying to make sure we do the right experiments and we go through the right thought process to translate that research into something useful at the end. And so yeah, that's my role basically. And we, to sort of catalyze that, we oversee a fund at the moment. It's sort of 60 something million Australian dollars, which is about 30 odd million UK, to try and sort of make that happen basically within the sort of bio ecosphere of Melbourne.
That is very cool.
Yeah,
Love
it's good.
it. Okay. So you were describing some of the things that you were sharing was like the general structure of how research tends to work. And I guess for students that have zero awareness, like
Mhm.
people go work in labs and that's super cool. But as you were describing this academia versus industry, how do those things fit together?
Yeah, unfortunately, they often don't fit together very well. But one of the things I'm really passionate about, and my previous experience helped me with, was how to connect the two. And so traditionally, people in academia, and so this is sort of classed as your universities or your research institutes, are very much kind of on one end of the sort of line, if you like, and then industry folks are very much on the other. And so both do very good science, both do very good work, but they're both very much after different things. And so the academic sort of university style research is very basic in its kind of in kind of its way or its method. And by that I mean sort of it's really underpicking the fundamentals of why something happens and understanding why that happens. Not often do those academics ask the question, why does that happen and what does that mean for us, and what can we do about something else? And that's really where industry comes in, which is where they don't necessarily ask why does something happen, but they then ask, okay, we understand that, or academia understand that, what can we do to utilize that knowledge and to generate something out of it, and therefore make a medicine, for example, or some technology. And so, yeah, I try and work in between the two and try and bring academia towards industry and industry towards academia, so that together they can work to make better drugs, make better technologies to impact patients ultimately.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, and I'm completely talking off the fly here. So please don't expect anything that I'm saying to be qualified by actual evidence or experience. But it looks like when you look at like the history of discoveries in medicine, a large part of it is attributed to some sort of academic institution because it's like big pharma is a relatively new thing. It's pretty much all
Yep.
been done by universities and people that were just interested in learning more about the world. So it makes
Hmm.
sense that those would continue to be the people that were behind these discoveries, but with the opportunity to have a bit more of a budget behind them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's like historically we're all taught about, Fleming's discoverer of penicillin or whatever, pick your favorite big scientist, and they would have usually been at Oxford or Cambridge or one of the big universities in America or something. And that was really a bit of serendipity and sort of discoveries of luck. And, without taking anything away from Fleming, as he saved millions of lives with that discovery, it wasn't in an era of sort of rational design of medicines. It was more kind of observations and how does, for example, the spores of a fungi eliminate a bacterial growth in that case. Nowadays, we're not entirely beyond that. There is still some very sort of academic discoveries that are sort of off the cuff and people didn't expect. CRISPR is a really great example of that. But a lot of discoveries now, and they're not particularly mainstream media. We don't often get taught about them, are being discovered in industry settings where people are throwing millions of dollars or pounds at problems, and medicines are being developed. Almost all medicines that we take would have been developed or discovered in a sort of academia industry relationship or in an industry setting. So
It's actually even more valuable, I think, at the moment because there's right now I'm preparing for a presentation tomorrow around the development of the STEM industry and how that doesn't really match with what's happening in education. Because a large part of what is being developed in tech at the moment is gene editing and
yeah,
AI. And essentially that kind of repetitive, non-expert lab work is not going to be a human job anymore. So
no,
it's going to
that
be
will
these
be
people
gone.
that are kind of really invested in a particular area of research that are going to be doing all
Yeah.
of these things.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think for us to utilize AI in the right way in healthcare, AI will be able to eventually understand and pick apart a problem and is already, doing that in some way. What we need to make sure as humans and in that setting is that we're not putting garbage into that setting. And so the early sort of AI rollout, if you like, in biology or in life sciences hasn't actually been that successful. There isn't that many clinical or that many candidates that have been generated by an AI type pipeline that have reached clinical success. Most of them actually have failed in some way. Recently, in the last year and a half, there have been a couple of examples of success, but that's actually because of the design of the data going into those systems. And so although AI will replace a large part of that repetitive kind of lab work that traditionally we've been taught is how you discover medicines, AI will be able to replace a lot of that, which is very exciting because we can get on with other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like I am a computer science expert, but it does kind of seem like computers are really good at processing large amounts of data and picking it
Yeah.
out in a format that a human can quickly read, but they're not really very good at nuance. They're not going to pick out, oh, that shouldn't have happened. Why did that happen? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good point. And some, yeah, again, the early indications they pattern recognize the wrong things. They'll get better at that. They'll learn, and that's the whole point of machine learning is that they will start picking apart. But it's largely because of the data they're trained upon isn't suitable yet, and so that's the key: is to make sure the data that's going in is of good quality and is adhering to good standard practice and is sort of consistent across vastly different inputters. That's going to be a major challenge for AI.
yeah. That used to be part of my job, looking at quality data that had been
Indeed.
put by an entire company. This just doesn't work.
Yes. And now you multiply that up by multiple companies, multiple academic institutes, multiple people. Oh, it's chaos. Yeah.
Oh, happy times. So I mean, your job now sounds really interesting, but you've done a few different things. Can you tell us about what led you into where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I did my kind of A levels, GCSEs, etc. Always wanted to go into medicine. Wanted to go into traditional kind of, doctor type roles. And for one reason or another, I wasn't able to do that. I didn't do particularly well at my A levels due to ill health mainly. And so actually the only degree program I was put onto was a biomedicine course. And so decided to go and do that. And my intention was to do that and switch into medicine. And when I turned up, I've always remember this second year practical, somebody said to me, here are some isolated mitochondria. You're going to put them into this machine called a Clark electrode, and you're going to monitor them respiring oxygen in real time. And my mind was just blown at that point. And that you could add things to this mixture and it changed the way that these mitochondria used oxygen. And that was just, unbelievable. And I think at that point, I realized that instead of going and doing medicine and maybe impacting 10, 15, 20 patients a day, I could make a discovery that impacted millions over its lifetime. And so that was kind of where I changed tack. Went into researching about PhDs, very much again in mitochondrial biology, was really interested in how this subcellular organelle controlled the cell, and therefore the cell controlled the tissue and the tissue controlled the organism. And it all seemed to come back to this mitochondria. So went over to Cambridge, did a PhD there. Then I did a short postdoc where I was trying to reevaluate what a research career was. Did I want to stay in traditional academia, stay in an industry, in an academia setting, in a university setting, or did I want to experience something a bit more aligned to my values and my sort of drivers, which was about developing medicines. And I wasn't particularly getting that in academia at the time. It was great to get publication opportunities and chances to promote my work at conferences and things. But what I wasn't getting was that opportunity to develop my thoughts or my ideas into medicines and therapies for patients. And so I moved to GSK, but under a sort of academic program where we had an academia industry hybrid model. And then over the next sort of 7 years, developed a group there that really worked in the gap between academia and industry, but within an industry setting, which was completely unique at the time. Now has been copied by numerous pharma companies.
Well,
But it was really good fun. Yeah, it worked really well. And it was a really good experience to not only learn for myself, but also pass on my knowledge of academia and my expertise in particular areas into industry and see how industry scientists worked and also see where industry didn't work very well. And that was the whole point in setting this whole group up, was to think differently, think outside the box, think more like an academic, but with a translational kind of hat on. So how do we get this discovery into a medicine? And learning those skills were really critical, and also really important for me to now do my job at the moment effectively. Without that skill set, I wouldn't be able to do it today. So yeah.
That's fantastic. See, I didn't know that, and I've definitely spoken to you about this before, but that sounds really interesting. I remember I obviously wasn't as interested in going down a more academic route. I was quite happy to be done with university when I was, but I was really interested in the same things at university. I remember learning about the mitochondria and that it has its own genetic information. So, well, it can't have genetic information if we're not using it for something.
Oh, it's definitely used. It's definitely used. It's it's incredible. And the most recent discoveries in that space have sort of blown the whole field open. We could spend the next 45 minutes talking about the latest mitochondrial discoveries. But no, it's a really cool area, and I was really pleased. And even now today, I try and stay on top of that area of literature, and even some of the projects I'm on now are still related to that kind of area of work. You never lose that sort of passion for something you want to do in science. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm keen to keep going with.
Yeah. But do we have as much information about what's in the mitochondria as we do now about the human genome? We have all of that.
I would say we understand the mitochondria really well. We know what every one of the genes do, job A, if you like. But what's really interesting is that the way the mitochondria are organized and the way they respond to cellular stress, or the way they respond to cell function, for example, in immunology is a really good example, how the mitochondria essentially control individual immune cell subtypes is vastly different. So, for example, in your T cell repertoire, your T effector cells, so those that will sort of respond to pathogen or will, produce a more inflammatory environment, completely, or not completely, but largely rely on non-mitochondrial sources of fuel. So mainly glucose and things like that. Whereas your kind of more suppressive, kind of anti-inflammatory T cells, like the T regulatory cells, largely rely on their mitochondria. So that kind of mitochondrial balance, and some would argue the sort of health of your mitochondria, completely dictates how your entire immune system responds to challenge. So it's a pretty interesting area to be in, and even to the point where how the mitochondria interact with each other within an individual cell. Are they all together in a nice network, or are they fragmented and acting as individuals? Also dictates how a cell responds to challenge, whether that be, for example, viral challenge or starvation or even too much food. How are they responding at the moment? There's a massive amount of research at the moment in sort of obesity in the diabetes field. And once again, mitochondria at the center of that. So,
amazing. Now you're
yeah.
kind of making me regret my choices, but I'm going to have lots of conversations with you because this sounds so interesting. I love it. Mitochondria is given responsibility. Well, spec-wise, it's the thing that respires. It's doing so much more than that.
Oh yes, yeah. The everyone says it's the sort of battery of the cell, the powerhouse of the cell. But I think that sums up about 1% of its actual role in the cell. It does a very important job, which is generating ATP. But the rest of what it does is arguably somewhat more important.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to exercise some self-discipline and not spend the entire time talking about that. Much as I love science, we've got to be focused on our audience.
Of course.
Can you tell me a little bit more about like Lee at school? What kind of things did you enjoy doing when you were at school?
Yeah, sure. I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do for a long time. And so particularly during GCSE, I wouldn't say I was particularly focused necessarily. I found science interesting. Would I have said at the age of 11 or 12 or 13, well, that's where I was going? Probably not. I wasn't that fussed. I enjoyed playing games, all the usual stuff. And then I think when it hit me was, so actually, this somewhat funny story. My GCSE chemistry teacher told me I'd never succeed in science because I was so bad
Cool.
at GCSE chemistry. And my GCSE biology teacher recommended I didn't take biology for A level because I was just not that interested. And the practical, if I remember rightly, was chopping up potatoes and seeing how much osmotic potential a potato had. And I was sitting there thinking, how on earth is this relevant to making a medicine or whatever? So I really wasn't that interested in the way it was taught at that time. I just didn't think there was any particular, I just wasn't interested, to be honest. And so I kind of just rolled my way through it. I think it was only when I started GCSE chemistry, actually. No, sorry, A-level chemistry. I decided to do A-level chemistry. I met my teacher, Nick Miniken, and I always remember he kind of took me aside one week and said, we could do biochemistry, which brought biology and chemistry together, and my mind was blown. I was no longer looking at how to count deer in a park in ecology, which was sort of what I was learning in biology. And I wasn't learning about why ammonia sulfate does this, that, and the other. And I just wasn't necessarily interested in the chemistry, like the real pure chemistry. And so when I merged the two together and suddenly we were talking about enzymes and how the process of the cells work and how do molecules that we eat get into cells to make them function, that was when I really thought, okay, this is where it's at. This is real science. And so that's when I decided and started to understand how these things tied together and how they made people sick. And it was only when so my nan was particularly unwell. She ended up with cancer. That was a bit of a flick for me to go, oh, hold on a minute. So these processes I'm learning about in normal scenarios behave like this, but in my nan, who's clearly very unwell, this isn't happening anymore. And why is that? And how can we stop that? And that's when I decided to initially go down the medicine path. So yeah, that was pretty much me. I sort of didn't really have that much interest in science until all these things kind of came together at once.
Yeah.
And even though my sort of main biology and chemistry teacher said don't bother, I sort of carried on with it. And it was somewhat fortunate that my biochemistry teacher sort of brought it all together for me and made me see the light.
I love that. That is a brilliant story to share because that's going to
Yeah.
be the experience of quite a lot of students, and the way that what your teachers share with you can be a big, like I'm pretty sure I made the choices I did because my teachers either told me that I was good at something or didn't. Um,
Yeah.
so it does make a big difference. But the difference between those teachers is that your biochemistry teacher recognized why you were disengaged from the curriculum and what you were actually interested in. So it's about
Yes.
personal relationships that helps people give you advice, not your behavior in a classroom.
Absolutely. Oh, I completely agree. And it was only taking the time to, if I remember rightly, I think I stayed behind after a class or something because I just did not understand the particular topic. And we just got chatting about where actually I do remember it was about iron sulfate. That was what it was. And I just didn't understand the whole sort of electron ring and how it was jumping between. I was trying to get grips with that. And it was a one-on-one conversation with this guy, and we started talking about iron in the body and anemia and how anemia happens, and it was suddenly sort of all coming together. And I think he recognized then in me that's where the interest was. It was the sort of, again, this translational, bringing chemistry into biology, and it was making that conscious effort to have a conversation with him that I think made the big difference. And then the rest is somewhat history, if you like.
Quite successful history. I like it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I'm glad I did actually go and visit some universities to do history as well. I did a history as my other A level,
oh,
and yeah, that was a particular interest of mine. I really enjoyed history. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed doing that part of it. But yeah, ended up going with the science instead.
I think it plays quite well into science, though. The history of medicine and science is quite relevant to what we do now.
Yeah, and those skills that you pick up with a critical analysis of a source. So what you would do in a history lesson, you would take a artifact from, I don't know, World War or whatever, and you would sort of analyze it for its reproducibility or its robustness or how much you could trust it. I do that every day in, day out, with scientific literature or patents or whatever. And those skills are super translatable. Wouldn't have thought that at the time, but now I can see it every day.
Brilliant. One
Yeah.
skill that I advocate very much for is people identifying the value of the sources of information they receive, because you're constantly
Hmm.
getting information put in front of you, and most
Oh,
of it's
yes.
nonsense.
100%. Yes. And even in today's day and age of social media and chat GPT and all these types of things, yeah, don't trust anything on face value. Always dig into it first.
Yeah, especially where, I mean, it's designed to be interesting. So if they just said, we looked at this, nothing much happened, nobody would care. But if they say,
Yeah.
this might kill you, and then you read in the
Yeah.
fine print, it's more interesting.
Yeah, it's a massive problem in science and public science. We've got a lot better at it over the past 5 years due to COVID, because I think people really saw the danger of um, misleading the reader. And so, unfortunately, the way funding and things works in science is that, the sort of quote unquote sexy science brings in the more money. And so you sort of hype up what you're trying to do. And it's not to say that, you're trying to mislead people, but you're trying to make it sound fantastic so you can bring in more money to get more funding to do more work. And I think the danger with that is that when the sort of mainstream media outlets get hold of these things, they turn them into these mental stories that really throw everybody off.
Mm.
And so, actually, over COVID, a lot of scientists got a lot better at public engagement
Mm.
and that kind of reasoning with the public and trying to get them to really critically analyze a piece of work, whether that's scientists or from the mainstream media. So yeah, scientists as a whole have learned a lot over the last few years about how to engage a non-scientific public.
Mm. Okay. I mean, very much necessary. I mean, I see there's some statistics showing that people are losing trust in scientists since the
Yes.
pandemic. which is frustrating because obviously everyone's pushing their own agenda, and I don't want to go massively political, but it does make it more important that people understand what information they're receiving.
Yeah, and trust in the source. It comes down to that at the end of the day. You know, if you're getting a really genuine bit of information from a reputable source, then yeah, it's okay. But really dig into where that information's come from. If they can't back it up, they can't find the original data, and often you know, painfully nowadays, you have to analyze the data yourself to really get the true story. So yeah, it's becoming more and more difficult.
I love it. So if there's, I mean, for me, it sounds really interesting, but if there's anyone listening to this that thinks, well, that sounds like a really interesting career path, I'm quite interested in that. Is there any advice that you would give someone around like 14, 18, making their choices of what to do next?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of it is kind of, you know, it's going to sound a bit cliche, but go with what you enjoy. And you know, if you're somebody that enjoys science, in that, you know, you enjoy exploring, you enjoy being creative, you enjoy kind of finding new things, there's no better feeling. I always remember in my PhD research, I developed a compound. You know, it's just an idea that I had. Um, Off the, I don't know where, I think I was cycling or something, and I just thought, oh, that'd be a really cool idea. Tried it and it worked. And at that realization, to know that I was the only person in the world that had known that that had worked, was a pretty mind-blowing moment.
Yeah.
And so if you want to be that type of person that really and there's some great images out there of like a circle of like what we currently know as humans, and then when you're doing your PhD, you just push that circle a tiny little bit further out, and that's really cool to be part of. So yeah, science has a really cool way of giving back. For like a 14 to 18-year-old, I would say, like, just read around it. Like, you know, you're going to get taught things in the curriculum that, you know, for example, for me, and actually funny enough, nowadays I really enjoy conservation and ecology and wildlife biology. At the time I hated it. Yes, you need to learn it, yes, you need to do it to get through the curriculum, but what I would say is find the areas you're interested in and read around them. Go and find other things online, bring that into your learning, ask the questions of the teachers, and push their knowledge as well, because they won't know everything, you know, as shocking as that is. So yeah, definitely read around, find areas you're interested in, and learn that way. I think there's this tendency, I think, to, if you're interested in science, people push you in the direction of medicine, and that may well be a great career path for you. That normally requires you to have physics, double physics, chemistry, biology, maths, double maths, all the million A levels, and, you know, a lot of pressure. It's not to say that don't do that, obviously, but recognize that there's other ways to do good science careers. It doesn't have to be medicine or anything or nothing, which is where I was a few years ago. I was disappointed I didn't do medicine, but then I now realize that actually what I'm doing now is arguably more impactful on patients. And so yeah, I think, you know, there's a whole world of scientific careers. Do the research and have a look what's out there. There's some really good educational sort of resources out there for sort of scientific careers, like the Royal Society of Biology, for example, has an excellent sort of landing page for careers in biology. So yeah, plenty of things out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think it's worth noting as well that the help that your teacher gave you was to show you that your options weren't limited to this or that. We can make it, there are more options usually for a student than are advertised at school. You don't have to do
Yes,
the rote A levels or the rote whatever.
absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like, you know, for me, neither of my parents are scientists, and neither of my parents went to university even. And so it was really treading new ground, and I had to find the right sponsors within my school environment to kind of try and help that process through. So, you know, if your biology, chemistry teacher, whatever, it isn't necessarily into the areas you are, find somebody that is. That might not be even at the school. Like, you know, contact local companies. Even, like, people are very welcome with their time. Like, if you're interested in pharmaceutical research or kind of academia research, you could always just try and approach people. You know, the world's a very connected place nowadays. You can find people pretty easily.
Thank you very much, Lee. I mean, I've had a lovely time learning about the mitochondria, so definitely,
That's good.
definitely valuable for me, but I think that'd be really valuable for students as well to listen to. So thank you for giving us your evening.
Pleasure. No, no worries at all. Happy to.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to have to chat to you again because I need to learn more. Have a good evening.
Sounds good.
I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers. Lovely to chat to you. See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.
Hi,
Bye.
I'm your podcast host, Georgina Green, and the founder of Green Tutors STEM Specialist Tuition Company. We've been supporting students with their GCSE and A-level maths, science, and STEM subject studies since 2011, and our team all work and have a passion for STEM professions such as engineering and chemical synthesis and medicines and all sorts of fantastic things in the world of STEM beyond the curriculum, which is what we bring into our lessons to make them more exciting. And the reason I wanted to share this podcast with you all. Alongside that, we've launched the STEM Educators Academy, where other STEM professionals and STEM education enthusiasts can come and learn about how to grow their STEM education practices together. If you're interested in any of the support that we offer, get in touch at greentutors.uk and you can access some of the free resources on there as well.
This podcast would not exist without the sponsorship of STEMazing. I'm very grateful to STEMazing, not only for sponsoring our podcast, but for the brilliant work that they're doing, fostering inspiration and inclusion in STEM. I recommend having a look at their website, stemazing.co.uk, which is what you can see right now, to see a bit more about the work that they do. Alongside the award-winning Inspiration Academy, bringing events into primary schools and inspiring young people to see their future in STEM, because you can't be what you can't see. There's a fantastic membership, which I'm a part of, for women in STEM to do more of this, fostering inspiration and inclusion in STEM, with monthly content shared on empowerment, inspiration, and community. That will help you to be a better role model and mentor to people in STEM. And finally, there's a brilliant library here of role models in STEM that you can go and have a look at and hear more about their STEM stories. Here's a shout out for our sponsor, Navigated Tutor. If you haven't seen this, I recommend having a look if you're in education. The Navigated Tutor platform gives access to a quarterly webinar and magazine and training resources. The first one I've already read and attended, and in minutes learned lots that's going to make a massive impact on the way that I support my students. This is brought to you by Arthur Moore, who is not only a fantastic tutor but also the host of the Tea and Teaching podcast and Tutoring Tips podcast, two of my most listened podcasts. So I recommend that you go and check those out if you're working in education at all, and sign yourself up to the Navigated Tutor platform for some fantastic CPD. You can get access to this at mooreedu.thinkific.com. That's mooreedu.thinkific.com.